Hello and welcome to episode 55 of the Give Me the Remote podcast. It is sometime between Christmas and New Year's 2019. In fact, I believe it is Saturday the 28th of December. My name is John and I am joined in the pod by...
Sheridan.
Hello Sheridan, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Not too bad. You surviving Christmas alright?
Barely.
Barely. Okay, well, here's hoping. Everyone's pulling for you. And what would you like to talk about first?
Well, I think we need to start off with Watchmen.
Okay, we're not saving the best till last here. We're
No.
just getting it out there.
What is this? This is the only way to show you the truth.
You need to help stop the 7th Cavalry.
I'm doing what?
Those fuckers are trying to start a war.
So, Watchmen was a bit of a tricky one to watch because they forced us to wait week by week.
Which they seem to be doing quite a lot
There's
now.
a lot more of, which is what partly, it's not just laziness, why our podcasting schedule's gotten weird and we're not podcasting every week because we end up with a whole bunch of shows that we're waiting to finish and then they all seem to finish roughly around Christmas Day, it seems. And then we're like, oh God, what shows are we going to talk about? But with Watchmen, it turned into real event television, didn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it was Monday night, Watchmen is on.
I haven't been excited to watch a show every week for a long time, and it was...
Well, since Game of Thrones, really.
Feeling. Yes.
Yeah. Although I would say this is... Watchmen, I mean, it's only one season, and it might just stay one season. Apparently there's a lot of frantic negotiation going on right now.
Well, I've got the skinny on that if you want.
Well, Lindelof's saying he won't do it.
He's saying he won't do it, yeah.
But there's a cash cow to be milked here.
Well, both he and Netflix have said that it's...
Netflix?
Oh, sorry, HBO. Have said that it is deserving of other stories. I mean, it's basically a universe, though, right?
Yeah, very much so.
So you don't need to have a continuous story. In fact, this isn't a continuous story. This is 35 years after the end of the comic book. Mm-hmm. And they deliberately do that because it's placed it in modern day.
Yep.
And they take liberties with some of the characters and what happened from the original comic book.
Yeah, I think you could say that there are many themes to the show is unreliable narration. And so the fact that there are differences in continuity between what was in the comic book and what's here doesn't necessarily mean one is right and one is wrong. It just means that the narrator has a different perspective.
Yeah, actually, when I was researching this, because I really loved the comic book, and I'm not a comic book person, but that book is one of my favourite books of all time. Mm-hmm. I didn't realise that Alan Moore, who's one of the co-creators, has basically tried to take his name off every single property of Watchmen since the book. Yep. Because he was quite disgusted with Rorschach becoming a hero. He said that he never wrote that character to be a hero. And
yeah,
so
you don't have that control over art, though. If people perceive your creation in a way that's different to your perception, that just indicates there's a rich inner depth to what you've created. I mean...
Well, so, but what they do with this show, though, is because, I mean, this is set after Rorschach is dead, and he becomes like a poster child for white supremacists.
Yeah, which we talked briefly about the first episode 2 podcasts ago, and it was somewhat distressing to us because certainly I did view Rorschach as a bit of a hero.
So basically, these creators have gone back to
Alan Moore's vision. Yeah, but just because assholes take a historical figure on as a symbol, that happens all the time. And relatively blameless historical figures end up being symbols for horrible people.
Yeah. There are other reasons, actually, Moore wants his name.
I mean, the big thing for Alan Moore's hatred of recreations of Watchmen is that he signed a deal when he was young, and he would admit foolish, that he would get possession of the property when it was out of print. And so the more DC flogs the horse and re-releases and recreates new items, the longer they run out the clock until Alan Moore is dead, and he never actually gets the intellectual property back.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's why he doesn't want anything to do with it, because it's, like, it's not my story anymore.
Yeah, which is sad and unfortunate. At the same time, David Gibbons, who was the other co-creator, is heavily involved in this one.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And I think the story being told is so good and so important that's well worth doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really... Because Watchmen being made around the time of the Cold War was always an extremely political, to me, piece of work. And this reimagining, or what I think that he calls it a remix, is really political about issues that are in contemporary society, which are around race and, increasing fascism and police brutality and...
Yeah, there's so many good things, and we're going to try and unpack them without going too long. I think one thing I would say is if you, as a listener, have not read the Watchmen graphic novel / comic book, I would actually say, despite the fact the fans are all down on it, the quickest, easiest way in is to watch the Zack Snyder movie Watchmen of 2009.
Do you think you actually have to have watched it, though, to enjoy this
show? You
show?
don't, and I know people who haven't, but the movie itself is enjoyable, and it will give you a lot, not all, but a lot of the backstory.
Because Dr. Manhattan is a bit of a weird thing to understand.
Yeah. Dr. Manhattan's the big thing, because he's the major fantastic element of all Watchmen stories.
I've never actually liked Manhattan as a character.
But he is rather important.
He's extremely important.
He's literally the MacGuffin.
There's just something about him that never quite... I don't know, it just didn't resonate with me or something. Anyway.
Yeah, but...
and it still doesn't, even in this show.
It doesn't, but I would say that watch the Zack Snyder movie from 2009, and then you are ready with enough backstory. There is, I think, all the backstory you need, but it's really hard to absorb because it's so densely presented in things on the radio or conversations in the background, or there's lots of little bits of Watchmen lore presented in this show in very... they're not extraneous, but certainly you've got to be careful to pick them up.
Yeah. There's a lot of nods to fans. I mean, a lot of it would be lost on me.
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching one of the early ones and you started saying, how do we know what's going on? And I was like, they were just talking about it on the radio in the car. So if you weren't listening to what was on the radio in the car, you were falling out of step with what was going on. But I think it can be watched because it's so well made on multiple levels.
Yeah. I felt it did drop a little towards the end.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't really like that show within a show episode.
Are you talking about Hooded Justice's origin story?
That's what I'm talking about, yes.
Right. That was an interesting story and had quite a lot of interesting things to say about homosexuality and race relations, though.
It just didn't gel to me with the continuous narrative.
It was a different sort of episode.
Like, it felt isolated from the series.
Yeah, each episode is really a standalone story with a bit of fringe stuff to advance the main plot, though.
Yeah.
That is how the whole thing's made. And it is more than anything about power and race. And I guess it's about masks. Masks is a definite major theme. There is a...
Which is a bit of a nod to, I think, well, not even a bit of a nod, but to social media and that people hide behind things at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it takes so many different ways into to lots of things. It's very clever. Regina King as a kick-ass action hero.
It's really, amazing performance. Just really, I just developed such a deep affection and care. I cared about that character.
Yeah, and I mean, it's very rare for any character in popular culture to have as much exploration. You really end up following her all the way from early childhood into her 40s at some significant length. And she remains interesting, and you don't know exactly what she's going to do all the way through. Now, a lot of people are calling this the best thing that's been on television this year.
Well, I would agree.
Yeah, okay. So I guess
it's just it's something completely new. Even though it is using an existing property, I've never seen a show explore these issues in this way. And it's just brilliant.
And do it so well. And even at times when there was one episode where I remember specifically because you got bored of about 40 minutes into it and then went to bed.
Well, I actually just got tired, is not bored.
True. Well, you were like, oh, this one isn't going anywhere there. And then it sort of exploded. But you did go back and rewatch it.
Yeah, and then I was like messaging you, oh my God!
And I think I can give them using that sort of pacing if they have the payoff. And that one definitely had the payoff. And so, in a way, that's to its credit as well that each of the episodes has very different pacing and structure. Even when there's ones that you're thinking, this is a bit oddball and weird. You wouldn't want a Watchmen that didn't have something oddball and weird in it, though, would you?
That's right. I would have liked to have seen a bit more exploration of Lady True's character.
Yes. I kind of like the way they kept her mysterious, though.
Apparently there was meant to be another episode.
Yeah, right.
But they decided that it would have just been filler.
Yep.
And a lot of what got taken out was her backstory.
Oh, okay. I thought there was enough there for me to understand her.
She is kind of mysterious, and that's kind of...
Yeah, that was fine. We did say after episode 1 that this show is going off in so many weird directions, and you're just watching it kind of in dread going, are they going to be able to land this?
Yeah.
Particularly with Lindelof's somewhat checkered past with shows that didn't quite nail the ending.
Yes.
And I've got to say...
Was Lindelof around, though, and Lost at the end?
I don't actually know the history of Lost that much.
I mean, because that's obviously the most famous show he's worked on that and really didn't stick the ending.
Yeah, I think as much as could be asked in something like this, the ending actually did land.
It felt like a complete closing off.
There was maybe a slight wobble, like where you see a gymnast do some sort of, quadruple spin off the vault and, they wobble on the landing, but they definitely stuck it. They didn't fall over on the landing.
Yeah.
So I think an enormous amount of credit needs to go to everyone who's involved. It's a shame Alan Moore, is stuck in a contract that doesn't seem properly rewarded for his part in creating the Watchmen universe, and also just isn't able in himself to give credit to this, because I think this show is actually a huge building on his legacy.
Yeah. One interesting fact, well, I don't even know if it's a fact, but rumour, is if people look at when I was doing the research, the Rotten Tomato score isn't that amazing.
Yep.
And apparently it was
being stacked by racists.
It's been, right-wing trolls, because they're annoyed about Rorschach not being a hero. And also just, I guess, the general Nazi vibe of the whole...
Yeah, the general treatment of race has upset a lot of crazy fanboys. Anyone who's saying, oh, you've ruined Watchmen by bringing race into it, or by bringing
it's absolutely
treatments
ridiculous.
of power has I don't even know what comic book they think they read when they were a kid.
Like, there's absolutely no basis for that at all.
Yeah, although there is much more about... colour. There was elements of colour in the original Watchmen, but not the way in this. It's absolute front and centre. No,
but it's a political book. Like, it's about politics.
Yeah. And even things, I mean, it's all about subversion of heroism, and particularly masked heroism. Superhero gets a bit weird because in Watchmen no one has superpowers except Dr. Manhattan. But the subversion that they do, where they start with the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre, where a very successful, it was called Black Wall Street, town was destroyed with airstrikes and artillery.
Which I didn't know was a real thing.
Yeah, most people didn't, and they have brought that to the public consciousness. And Lindelof, I've heard him interviewed saying that was the thing that he actually wanted to get out there in the public and get people talking about, and that was why he did this project.
One thing, too, probably should state is that, Lindelof's white. But made a genuine attempt to hire a writing room that was extremely diverse. Like, he had a requirement there would be 50% black people and 50% women.
Yep, and also 50% Watchmen aficionados and 50% who are fresh to the material.
Yeah, right.
Which the last person hired must have had to tick a weird checklist of boxes. But
I think that actually was quite a sensitive... Like, he obviously came up with his concept, which is focused on race. But, you know, he... As a white person, you can't really tell that story without...
On your own, no.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point I'm trying to make was that the opening is in many ways a almost shot-for-shot remake of the birth of Superman, with the family on the dying planet sending their... saving their child and sending it out into another world. And that also ties in... And in that case, it's a black family whose town is being destroyed by the Klan. Putting their child on a wagon that's leaving town. And that's in the first episode, so I'm not being too spoily there, I don't think. And that also then goes to a concept that Alan Moore's had, which is that D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation... Oh, there's an unfortunate last name there. But Birth of a Nation from the 1920s, which is one of the most racist films ever made, and I believe still holds a number of Academy Awards that people mutter about every now and then. He calls that the first superhero movie where these figures in their clan masks are the heroes of the narrative.
Yeah, right.
And that gives you a lot more to think about. There's a beautiful line towards the end of this where Ozymandias says, I had to put you in a mask because masks make people cruel, that I thought, really just twanged. Because one of the cool things that constantly sets your hackles up in this is the way the police are all wearing yellow masks. It's like the scarves a lot of American police wear around their necks but pulled up under their noses so people can't see their faces. And every time you see it, you're like, ooh, that's weird and scary. But increasingly in Australia, I mean, I've been to public events at the War Memorial where the soldiers have worn masks, and I found that quite upsetting and scary.
Yeah, right. All right, what are you going to give it?
I have but 5 stars to give.
Yeah, same.
Okay, so what's next?
Let's do For All Mankind.
We will be the ones reaching into space for all of mankind.
Nixon wants us to put a woman on the moon.
Anybody tell the president that we don't have any female astronauts?
You are officially astronaut candidates.
It's not easy.
Now, another story of an alternate history, which is kind of interesting. And this one is on Apple TV, one of their real flagship marquee shows.
I don't actually agree that Watchmen's an alternate history.
In what way is it not an alternate history?
Because it has Dr. Manhattan, who is a superhero.
Which is definitely not in our timeline. But a lot of the stuff, like the presidency going through an extended Nixon presidency to a Robert Redford presidency, the stuff with the fact that electric cars are overwhelming and yet it's still a world recognisable to our own.
It is recognisable, but this is a genuine alternate history. There's no different technology or...
So you're saying For All Mankind is a more serious alternate history?
Yes. So basically the alternate history is if the space race had have continued, what would have happened? And that involves...
Hang on, there is the bit that you didn't get was happening right at the start.
What bit didn't I get?
When the Russians landed on the moon first.
Oh, well, I just forgot about that, actually.
But I would say, in that opening, it is so good in that you're watching it like, yeah, this is something about the moon landing, rah, 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 and then little things keep dropping, and you're like, oh, this is odd, and this is wrong, and this increasing sense of just slight wrongness up until they unfurl the communist flag, the Soviet flag on the surface of the moon. You go, oh, this is really something different. And then it's about the American reaction to it, and then the Soviets land a woman on the moon, and it stops being For All Mankind, which is the whole name of the show, is a jab itself at the masculine nature of the American space program through this period.
Well, I mean, through, I would say, most of the period of the space program has been notorious for excluding women and people of colour.
Women were on the space shuttles in the late 80s.
But they were few and far between.
Yeah, sure. But they were making a more of an effort from that time.
Yeah.
And interestingly, what they dig into here is that there was actually an effort to bring women into the space program very early. I think in the Gemini missions, where they had a shadow program of women pilots being ready to be brought in, and then decisions were made by someone. Definitely not mentioned who that someone was in this, and I have never seen exactly who made the call to shut that down and keep women out of the space program. But so the show is enormously loaded with equality and inequality and things like, subconscious bias and just simple stuff like they show, instead of telling quite well, how just because if you've only ever recruited from Navy pilots, they all know how to land fast jets on the deck of an aircraft carrier. If you make that a prerequisite to be in the space program, you're only going to have dudes able to do it. It's just not a skill anyone else is taught how to do.
Yeah. One of the problems I do have with the show, though, is, this is obviously a show that examines what would have happened if there was more equal treatment of people coming into the space program to work. It dances, which is, but it dances around the sexism a bit too much at times. It doesn't fully evaluate sometimes it's a bit too like, oh, rah, wouldn't this be an amazing alternate universe? Look at what we could teach. There's this character that's a little girl that comes into NASA and wants to be a space on the kids' space program from Mexico or something. And she's kind of like...
It wasn't quite the kids' space program as much as a scholarship pass through university.
Yeah, whatever it is. But, it was a bit like, oh, rah, wouldn't that be great? But, I don't know, it just didn't land a lot of the commentary around it for me. It didn't go deep enough.
Okay. There were a few times where you got hard in the feels by it.
Well, I just got annoyed. It's actually annoying watching a show like this because you're like, well, actually... this could have been a world that I could have grown up with where it would have been normalised for women to be astronauts. It wouldn't have been an abnormal thing. And that just peeved me off.
Sorry, are you saying it peeved you off that the world you didn't have? Or
Yeah.
It peeved you off that the show didn't do things you wanted it to do?
Well, both, probably.
Okay. That's a lot to hang on a show.
Well, they put it out there. That's part of what it's about, though. The show is actually
enormously
about
that. Yeah, they literally put it in the title.
Yeah.
Calling it For All Mankind was not an accident. Interestingly, the Queen in her Christmas message this year actually had a go at For All Mankind, noting that it should also be for womankind as well, which... Yeah.
I mean, so for example, sorry, my point was probably a little bit confused, but...
It was extremely confused.
Well, I've got a lot of feelings about it, and then it's hard for me to unpack it, especially without giving out spoilers. I think the last half of the series goes off into a bit too much of soap opera kind of drama, especially when Joel Kinnaman, who's the main male astronaut, is stuck on the moon on his own.
Yeah, they could have cut 2 episodes out of that.
That to me was irrelevant to the social commentary, which to me is what the show was about.
Yeah.
And it just became a bit, oh, here's a story about a white dude. And it's like, well, I've seen that show. I don't need to see it again.
Yeah, I thought the show was at its best when Molly Cobb as a character was front and centre, who was a very tough woman and based on a real life, extremely tough woman who was assessed in the when they still had the women's program as being in the top 2%, not of the population, but of the astronaut program, and who had been flying crop dusters from the age of 15 for a living. And the thought of a 15-year-old woman doing crop dusting work across the American Midwest is and maintaining her own plane out of her earnings. That's an interesting human being, and they cut. Apparently, she was a really religious woman, and they cut that out of here.
Yeah. Right.
Apparently, the Russian cosmonauts, the female cosmonauts, used to say really mean things about her crazy religiousness in the media. Back before they had Twitter, they had to do those things through newspapers. But there's a fair bit of her, and while she's front and centre, I think it's more interesting. And when it's just Joel Kinnaman of here is alpha man bestriding
And also
the man.
analysing their extremely heteronormative relationship with his wife, who wasn't part of the space program. I was a bit like, why are we watching this? Why are we watching this particular story?
They did also have a lot of exploration of the difficulties of being gay in the Cold War.
But that didn't have anything to do with his character.
Not to do with his character, but
family.
it was explored in the show at the same time. You know?
Yeah, but I'm just saying that narrative, to me, I was like, I don't need to see that. Why are you giving me something that I've already seen? You've set it up where you're going to explore this alternate universe where people that have been marginalised and not actually allowed to have opportunities in this program, you're going to present to me a show about what it would look like if they were, and then you're going to take that away from me, and you're just going to give me a story about a heterosexual white couple for 3 episodes.
Out of something like 10.
Yeah,
though.
but it really bugged me.
Okay, it sounds like this show did evoke a lot of strong emotions in you, though. And it did give you a lot of things that you actually wanted. And then you just got angry when it didn't,
Well, it didn't,
give
but
you everything
they
you wanted.
set it up. But also, it wasn't a very exciting storyline.
Right.
It was pretty ordinary family tragedy kind of stuff.
I think it had the classic renewal blues where they started making an awesome show and then someone said, we're going to go for a second season, and then that messed with their story arcs.
It really just fell down big time on that to me.
Yeah.
And I really like Joel Kinnaman as an actor, but I was just like, I don't need this character.
Yeah, I thought there were a lot of really good bits in the last 2 episodes, and there was a lot of really good stuff in the first 3 episodes, and I'd agree it was a bit flat through the middle.
I mean, the more interesting dynamic was between Kinnaman's co-pilot, whose name's escaping me, and his wife, because she comes into the space program and assesses the what it would have been like for a housewife to turn into a professional astronaut. And that was interesting.
Particularly one who's only marginally capable, but is being nursed through the program for political reasons. Which was also...
Yeah.
You know, and...
I mean, I
and the
didn't
pressure
mind that
that
stuff.
put on her.
I didn't
Yeah.
mind that stuff. I mean, there's plenty of dudes that have been nursed through programs for political reasons.
Yeah. Mostly because of who their dad is. But
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, well, we've talked quite a lot about it.
All right, so what do you want to give it?
I'm going to give it 4.5 stars. I agree it got a little bit flat, but there's a lot of magic to this. And when I say magic, you know, there's moments of tension in deep space. And there's something
There's some very good scenes.
There's something about that setting that is and always probably will be super compelling. And
yeah, because I mean, it's not reality for most of us, but humans have done it, so therefore it's sort of in a weird way. You can imagine being there.
And the situation is full of jeopardy because they are a long way from help. Yeah. So 4.5 from me. What are you going to give it?
I'm tossing between 3 and 4. I've got to say.
Okay.
I think I'm going to go the 4 though.
Okay. All right. We got there in the end. For all mankind, 4 stars from Sheridan, 5 from me.
4.5. I thought you said.
Oh yeah, 4.5 from me. Yeah, we're very close in the end. It turns out. Yes. Well done, us.
All right.
So what's next?
2 Popes.
I hope this business is not too distressing.
Does a shepherd run away when the wolves appear?
We are moving in directions I can no longer condone.
2 Popes.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a Netflix original
that they release in theatres, like 19 theatres, so it can
Win
be
an Oscar.
nominated for an Oscar.
Yeah, it's the Give Us an Oscar.
It has a box office takings of $590,000.
That's pretty good for 10 theatres.
Actually, apparently that's because Netflix don't release their box office takings
Yes.
for the films they release in cinemas.
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't think the studio had any control over the release of the takings.
Apparently they do.
Anywho. Okay. 2 popes. So it's about the fact that we live in a strange era where there are 2 living popes, because normally one has to die before.
I didn't realise how strange it was, but it was very strange. I got a deep dive into the Catholic...
Ecclesiastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there were times in the Middle Ages where there were multiple competing popes, and even anti-popes. But in this case, it's really just the fact that one has resigned and is not dead, and the other one is in office.
Apparently there's a lot of controversy about Benedict, who's the resigned pope, still wearing papal white. Apparently people think that's a diss.
Saying what, I'm still the boss.
Well, I'm still a pope.
Mm.
He also penned a 6,000-word letter about sexual abuse in the church, which was published a little while ago, that did not go down very well. Anyway, so we'll focus on this story.
There was about 5 jokes that went through my head there, and then I thought, no.
So this film is about the time basically right prior to when Benedict is about to resign, and he invites Francis, what's his actual name?
Well, his name was Jorge.
Jorge Boglian. I'm just gonna.
Jeez, that's awful, Sheridan.
I know. I've just offended the whole of Latin America.
It's okay. They don't care.
No, I don't think.
If they did care, they'd be offended. But yeah.
Yeah, so right before he's about to resign, and he invites Pope Francis, we'll just call him Pope Francis, to his summer house, because I guess, he starts off because he wants him to resign, but then he doesn't want him to resign because he wants him to be the new pope.
Francis is wanting to resign because he sees the election of Benedict as the church taking a retrograde step into the past instead of modernising, and he's saying, I don't want to be a part of this church as a cardinal, as a prince of the church.
Yeah. I
want to resign and go back to just being an ordinary parish priest and care to my flock in one parish, and that's what he thinks he's doing when he goes to see the Pope with his papers already signed. I mean, numerous parts of the movie keeps pushing the papers under Benedict, saying, "Come on, sign it, let me go." But what he, I'm thinking about not being too spoily here. Let's not be too spoily.
I mean, we know Francis becomes Pope, though.
Yes,
so
that is well known. Anyway, so he does indeed end up becoming Pope. He's in some ways being tested by Benedict, and I mean, played by Anthony Hopkins, who does wise old men particularly well, and certainly, in my view, probably gives too much gravitas and wisdom to Pope Benedict.
So basically, this movie is basically just 2 actors the entire time.
2 old
There's
dudes.
Very few scenes with anyone else in them.
Yep.
There's a bit of archival footage, which is actually quite.
They splice it in just to show off how good a job they've done dressing them up.
It's also like the creative reuse of archival materials.
Yes. Also, the High Sparrow from Game of Thrones plays Pope Francis.
So Jonathan Pryce.
Yes, which is a wonderful piece of casting, and it feels like the High Sparrow's just stepped out of Game of Thrones to take over the Catholic Church.
So apparently this didn't happen, though. There's actually no evidence that Francis tried to resign. There's no evidence that they met prior to the resignation. This is a completely fictional work.
Uh-huh. So the scene when Pope Benedict walks through the Sistine Chapel full of tourists?
Not true.
Yeah, right.
Oh, actually, sorry. When Francis did, but... Oh, sorry, Benedict did, but Francis didn't.
Right.
And wasn't known to be there at the time.
So, I mean, a lot of this is an enormous amount of justification. And, I mean, there's a huge chunk of the middle of the film, a flashback to the military junta years in Argentina where Francis did some highly questionable things that got some priests tortured. And trying to explain that maybe he had good reasons for doing what he did, even though the outcome was bad.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm a little bit torn, right, with this film because... when I'm watching it, I'm sort of thinking to myself, oh, this is a great story, not knowing that it wasn't true. But then also going...
Many great stories are not true.
I know. But then also going, I'm pretty sure Francis was probably a bit of a douche during this uprising in Argentina. And he's coming across looking real great. And also, he's making some really positive comments at the moment about how the church should deal with sexual abuse, which I definitely know didn't happen, because he's been a mass failure on that, really.
I would give him some passes for the fact that the Catholic Church is an unbelievably hard organisation to deal with on that issue, even when you're the Pope, particularly because it still harbours an enormous number of sexual predators who are trying desperately not to be exposed. That makes life tricky, you know.
So when I was watching it, I definitely felt that I was watching a piece of propaganda. But at the same time, I was like, do you know what? This is really well written, and these actors are bloody amazing, and I'm having quite the enjoyable time watching the little bromance unfold, the back and forth banter. This is an enjoyable film to watch.
Yes. If you're into, I mean, a bit like The Irishman, which we haven't watched yet, it's an old men's romp, which an unbelievable amount of entertainment these days is, and I guess that's good, that older people having TV made about them instead of the tyranny of the young, and us, you know, our sort of middle-aged period have something to hope for and look forward to. At the same time, I mean, you were saying, my God, this is literally the patriarchy, because, you know, when it's about popes.
This is my problem with the Catholic Church is there's very few, when they show the scenes when they're voting in the new pope, what do you call that ceremony or whatever it is?
It's an election, but they don't use that term. Yeah. Conclave? It's a papal conclave.
Papal conclave. Which was actually a really great thing to actually see on film. Because it's something you don't usually see.
Yeah.
But every single person in that room is 90% of them are white. They're all old. They are all dudes. Yeah. Even the people bringing them, you know, their pens and their lunch and stuff. There's a few nuns circling around,
doing the sandwiches,
doing stuff in the Pope's quarters, but in that centralized part of power, they're all men, and it is a very, very rare thing in modern society to not even have a woman serving tea, and that is patriarchy, because that is excluding women completely from your power structure.
Part of me is like, what are you surprised about? The Catholic Church has been unbelievably sexist.
Well, no, but just when you see
and oppressive in its gender relations.
I'm not surprised, but you see it and you're confronted by it, and it just, you know. But at the same time, it was quite an enjoyable film to watch because it was just very well acted. They're great, two really great actors.
Yeah, well acted, well written.
And, you know, essentially having a conversation about theological issues. I mean, not very deep ones, I'll confess, because, you know, I'm no theologian. But I found that quite enjoyable, to be listening to that kind of conversation. It's not something you usually see on a film.
Yeah, I enjoyed the conversations. As you note, it is a work of propaganda. And it's the propaganda. And literally, there's a moment when I was like, there's two people on screen. One of them had to have told the story for this story to be made, and I guarantee it was Francis has told a story for this to be made. And it's either directly him being involved or people who support him trying to make something that makes this guy is great.
I mean, after watching this, I was like, oh, wow, this Pope seems great. I'm going to look him up.
Yeah, but
I think he likes the gays. No, he doesn't. He doesn't.
That's more complicated. I think he likes the gays as much as the Pope of the Catholic Church can, and is trying to push the envelope more to the liking side of things. But you fundamentally have a lot of people who... frankly, there are fundamentally a huge number of closeted homosexuals in the ranks of the Catholic Church who, again, are terrified of being
there was
exposed.
a scene there where when Francis, it's a flashback scene, goes into the monastery as a young guy, and I just thought to myself, I reckon there'd be a lot of switching between chambers at this place. Just putting it out there.
Well, you've got your cultures of abuse and...
I'm sorry, I was making the joke there about consensual male gay relationships. I wasn't making a joke about abuse.
It is complicated. I mean, there's things that have been exposed just this year of female religious communities being exploited by... Oh,
there's a huge inquiry going on, or complaint going on at the moment against Francis's inaction about nuns are all female, nuns being sexually abused.
Yes.
And they've done absolutely nothing about that.
Yeah. Again, because the abusers are powerful and the church is a hierarchy.
And these women have been forced to live, they've been abused and then forced to live in absolute abject poverty.
Yeah. I think possibly the story that doesn't get told here is how this absolute hierarchy protects powerful, evil people. And we don't see pretty much any of that in this. It's sort of hinted off at the sidelines occasionally that something's not quite right. And, of course, there's utterly hinted at and never explained is why Benedict is actually resigning.
Yeah, which actually, when I've researched it, he's just basically said that he didn't think his mind and body could withstand it. And the explanation seems to be that because John Paul basically had the last decade of his papacy, he was completely incapable of coming out because he had Parkinson's, that he didn't want to do that. And I mean, there is something to that these guys are living...
Everyone knows that isn't... And everyone knows that might have been part of the reason, but it's not the whole reason.
But these guys are living longer than what popes did a century ago.
No, there is that, absolutely. But fundamentally, the reasons behind why Benedict resigned are shrouded in mystery. This is a movie about his resignation that doesn't actually address it. True, and all this stuff that you read since with, where he does things like, where's papacy white? I mean, that is definitely him sort of saying, I'm here, I'm a pope too. And that does sort of indicate that maybe he didn't go willingly, but I might be wrong, I don't know. So it's definitely intriguing. I would actually like to read a book on it. Okay, well, I'm glad it stimulated your curiosity.
But I'm really torn though, because those questions weren't answered, but this is like a film that you should watch with your mum.
Why?
Or your nan. Because they'd like it.
Why don't you just set them up to watch it and walk away and watch something more interesting?
Or do that. tell your mum or your nan to watch it. But that's what this is what this essentially is. It's a bit of fluff.
Yeah, I came into this feeling quite well disposed to it because we watched it last night, and like you say, it's a well-made piece of movie making. It explores some interesting bits of history, but I think fundamentally there are very important questions that this doesn't answer, and that it even begs, like, why was this made? Whose interest in whose interest was it made? I tried to
do a bit of research, and there's nothing really. So the guy who directed it, he wrote a play, so it's based on a play that he wrote that was basically the same name.
Yeah, it would work really well as a play.
I mean, it definitely has that vibe about it of being a play. So he made City of God, which is that Brazilian film.
Yeah. It's
pretty well known.
Yeah, the favela scenes in Argentina showed a damp hand at Latin America. Yeah,
so, I mean, he's Latin American. I'm assuming he's Catholic. Sorry, that's the director, the writer.
Coming from the Camp Francis there, yeah.
The writer wrote The Darkest Hour.
Also a piece of rank propaganda in service of power.
Bohemian Rhapsody.
Okay, some good films. But
obviously, kind of biopic films and The Theory of Everything. So
Okay.
I mean, maybe you have to have a bit of that.
I think they're
aggrandizing people when you tell their story of their life. I don't know.
Yeah, could be. Anyway, I'm only going to give it 3 stars because I feel that the important questions that it opens up but doesn't address is a pretty major failing.
Yeah, I'm going to give it 3 stars. It was disappointing because actually it's a very watchable film. And actually, I always like a film that's based on real life. If it makes me go and research just straight away after. And I was intrigued by it, but...
Yeah.
Yeah, so 3 stars.
Hey, okay, well, we're largely in agreement. Okay, folks, thank you very much for listening through. We will be back quite soon because, as we noted, we've finished watching a whole bunch of shows and we need to get through them. Mandalorian, Witcher, lots of good stuff to get into. Rick and Morty, Season 4. So there you go, there's the next show all lined up. We'll knock that out tomorrow. Probably not tomorrow, but soon. So do please send us your emails to gmtrpodcast@gmail.com or like, share, subscribe, comment on any of the social medias in which you find us. And, of course, do tell your friends to listen to us because we're awesome and you like listening to us. Otherwise, you wouldn't still be here. On that note, I think we can wish you a Happy New Year. We're probably not going to get another episode for then. Woo! And we will be back soon.
See ya.